All right, welcome everybody. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, joined by Kevin Gordon. Kevin, President of Capital Advisors. Glad you're here this week.
Yeah, it's good to be back again. Thanks.
And we have a very special guest joining us as well, Brian Olson. He's the chair of the Cybersecurity Task Force for the state of California, one of the top cybersecurity experts in the field, also one of the digital advisors consultants that works directly with our clients. So, Brian, what a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Tim.
And just real quick before we jump in, want to remind everybody, thank you so much for watching this broadcast. If you haven't yet, please click subscribe. It should be right here above my finger. And you are our marketing team. If you find these things useful, please share, like, retweet, and give us a hand. And please make sure you do subscribe and help us spread the word. So with that, let's just jump right in. And Kevin, boy, this is the very final chance to get a stimulus, and of course, it's in the news. But just kind of fill us in on what's going on with DC and some of the likelihood of seeing any action here before everyone takes off before the elections.
Yeah, I mean, Governor Weiss will probably be with us maybe next week or the week after to be able to talk about this again, and we'll see whether or not he needs to bring his knife and fork again. But I mean, it actually validates all of our, optimism that we've always had that sort of keeps coming up, and it sort of defies logic that they haven't been able to get this done. But Pelosi and Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, are trying in earnest with these sort of long meetings that they've been having to talk about this stuff to get something pulled together. So again, they talked by phone today. They were going to try to meet again. They had a very long meeting yesterday. There was a vote that was actually supposed to happen yesterday. The speaker put it off because she keeps wanting to give more time for there to be a deal that they might strike. There's sort of an unknown about the Senate Republicans, but I believe that if House Democrats and the White House can come together on a package, then the Senate Republicans will probably come along. Now, there's still a big difference. As of this afternoon, the speaker has her proposal, which is a sort of redone version of the HEROES Act, which is instead of $3 trillion is $2.2 trillion. The administration came up just slightly since yesterday to $1.6 trillion. The administration is putting a huge emphasis, believe it or not, on education, but obviously it has the checks in it that would go out on unemployment types of issues. Those kinds of things are all in the mix. One of the biggest sticking points is going to be about what kind of state aid there is. Obviously, for schools in California, we benefit hugely from there being a combined effort to address both the needs that we have in schools and the state bailout kind of thing, which in the remodeled sort of HEROES Act that the Speaker and House Democrats put together, they have, somewhere in the range of $440 billion now that would go to states and local governments. That's a lot of money. And in fact, Governor Newsom put out a statement day before yesterday that said sort of this rewritten version of the HEROES Act would be enough to basically reverse out the cuts that are proposed for education. And we see that manifest in the budget that we're all living with, which are these big, big deferrals. So obviously to have that go away would be good. If we get a little in both, if we get some significant state aid, and then we also get some good education assistance, we'll be able to not only avert cuts, but we'll actually be able to do more to mitigate some of the challenges that we have with technology and all the other things. By the way, and then this will interest you, Tim, $12 billion is in the bill exclusively for ed tech. So that's kind of a cool development. We're going to need it for a lot of the mitigation that we have, but that is a part of this package. So they haven't left that on the cutting, the cutting room floor. So anyway, we'll see what happens. One of the things that got in the way of this and delayed it was that they did have a budget deadline in terms of shutting down the government if they didn't get a stopgap budget item passed. That actually got passed. We talked about it last week. It's the one that deep in it was the item on the extension with regard to child nutrition issues. We were happy that it was there, but that was back when we reported on it, was only the House's action. The U.S. Senate acted on it just last night, their vote coming at like 5 p.m. So then they had to chase down the president after his rallies yesterday, which were out of Washington, D.C. When he arrived back, he actually signed the thing after the Senate had acted. He signed it after midnight, an hour after normally the deadline would have come for closing down the government. But the president did get it signed. So now their attention turns to this potential effort on stimulus. Again, we're now, approaching 40 hours over what was the intention of the speaker to take this to a vote. So the optimism is getting a little dimmer now, as of the latest report that we just got within the last hour. So we'll see what happens. I would love there to be a solution. I'm pretty optimistic that regardless of what happens on the outcome of the presidential election, I think they will get something done in the meantime. I think Trump knows that he's got to stimulate this economy. Even if he wins, he's got to do it. If Biden wins, he's going to want to spend a lot of money to revive the economy. I don't think it's over for the year if they don't get it done before the election, but it would be sure nice if they do get it done before the election. So that's the update on all that politics back in D.C.
Thanks, Kevin. And as we talked about last week, the Fed came out and said we need to get this done. All we've heard is we need to get this done. Yeah, it's not done. And you mentioned we went from somewhere between 2 and 4 billion for assisting schools with these technology challenges that we're all facing with distance learning right now. What a comfort to hear that it's gone up to 12 billion because this is not an inexpensive problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, Tim, it's a much smaller package overall than the original HEROES Act, but for education across the board, it really got better. Like, we were talking about between 70 and $100 billion, which were in the different proposals just in the last couple of weeks. That's the best that we saw. HEROES Act had 70 billion. This thing has 175 billion for education, and the 12 billion for ed tech is on top of that. So, I mean, even if we go down to Mnuchin's $1.6 billion figure, the numbers are still better than the original HEROES Act for education. So, we hope those discussions continue and they can get something done, because almost anything they do is going to have a big education component to it. That'll be good for us.
Well, one scary thing I read, I believe it was yesterday, it's happening so fast, is that McConnell came out and said, we're not gonna support whatever is brought to us. They're like just basically shutting it down.
Yeah.
And that's quite frustrating and a little hard to believe based on the fact that the elections are coming up and people are at risk of losing their jobs. But maybe fill us in on what you see there if they are able to get something done.
There's a lot. I think he's doing that as a placeholder so that he gets to have some say over what it comes out to be. If the White House and the House Democrats are negotiating this, ultimately you got to go to the U.S. Senate. I think what he's saying, we're not going to just rubber stamp it, is the U.S. Senate and the Senate Republicans in particular are going to have their say on what goes in or out of it as well. I just think there's an awful lot of pressure on Mitch McConnell and his Senate colleagues. If the White House and House Democrats can get together, it'll be a sad commentary on the U.S. Senate if they can't get this done. And I think it exacerbates his problems with holding on to the U.S. Senate in Republican hands. I think that would be a big mistake on his part politically. The other issue is, while he simultaneously seems to be able to jam through a U.S. Supreme Court nomination, but he can't get this done, one of the most fundamental things for Americans, in particular people that are out of work. I think that if they can get it across the finish line, Mnuchin and Pelosi, that he's going to have a huge amount of pressure on him to do something. So, me, I keep sitting here with my fingers crossed. So we'll see what happens.
Well, thanks, Kevin. At some point, we'll know whether we're going to get this done or not, and it's coming up quick. So,
yep.
And as always, keeping our fingers and toes crossed on this stimulus package. So, thanks for that.
Yeah.
And let's switch gears over to you, Brian. I wanted to, we talked last week about we've been discussing some of the propositions that are on the November ballot in California. Last week, you talked about Prop 15. We said that we're going to talk about Prop 24, cybersecurity policy, sort of an update, CCPA 2.0, if you will. Can you talk about just sort of the bill itself and what are the intentions of that bill? Like, we already have CCPA 1.0. What's different about 2.0 this time?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, 2.0 is it's a continuation of obviously CCPA. It's It has a couple of key provisions that have changed. One, schools are still exempt, largely they're still exempt, but one of the key provisions that you need to be aware of is that if you're a school, your vendors are subject to CCPA, and they continue to be subject to the new law if it passes, which is polling very highly. So I really think it's going to pass CCPA 2.0. But when you have vendors like your student record system, various other, Zoom, things like this, they all have your student data in there, and they are subject to these regulations. So one of the key things is if you're negotiating contracts or something like this, you really need to make sure that these vendors are, following CCPA and protecting the student's privacy. Outside of that, there's not huge changes that impact schools. It's there's significant fines, things like that, but it's mainly an impact to your vendors that you're dealing with. So be cognizant of that. Have conversations with your vendors about the impact of those things.
Thanks,
Brian.
Brian.
Again, what ballot measure is that?
24.
Prop 24. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the one thing that we always say in politics when you look at these ballot measures is there a campaign? Is there anybody with money that would put up a campaign to oppose it? And I haven't seen anything. And of course, the airwaves are clogged with some of these other titans of politics going after each other. Are you expecting any kind of a no campaign on this, Brian?
There's some significant money behind it, but it's about a fifth of what the pro is.
Got it.
And there's some money behind it, but there's a couple of that really it's kind of a mixed bag. It gives some good some additional privacy protections. It extends, it increases violations, especially for children under the age of 16 and the under age of 13. And it also removes some 30-day cure. A business could be notified of a violation. They'd have 30 days to fix it. Under the new legislation, they have no time at all. They're just going to be subject to the fines immediately. Wow. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, they're saying, but yeah.
So we can expect probably business groups, the chamber, those kinds of groups to perhaps be opposed to it, maybe.
Well, it's the scary thing is mainly business has been silent on this. So this is a very large bill. It's 52 pages in length, 52 or 58, something like that. So they've been largely silent about it. So that makes you a little wary as well.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something behind the scenes we don't know, but I've read the text of the bill, and it's it changes a few things, but it's and it also creates a state bureaucracy, a 5-member board to govern privacy. But I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. So yeah, it's if you feel strongly one way or the other, vote your conscience. But I don't see anything egregious for schools specifically.
What I see, Brian, is there's a hidden benefit here when we're talking about the extra emphasis on the vendors that the school districts might be working with, because as we know, one of the sort of hidden gotchas is not necessarily the vendor that you're working with, but the third parties that they might be engaged with that have your data. In other words, you've engaged with this company, you believe you're doing business with them, yet there's a third party involved that is sort of moving the data. Either it sits with them or it's moving in between. And that's actually where we see a lot of breakdown, right? Because the connection between you and this company, you can do all the work you want to protect your data. But if they don't do a good job on their end protecting it back to that third party, that's where a breach or a loss could happen. And that's one of the things I believe has been the toughest for school districts to sort of navigate, because boy, just good luck picking one partner and then go and look in their closet and see all the other folks that they might be connected with. And I believe that transparency ultimately is going to be a good thing. Although I believe that's also probably what led to the 52-page Game of Thrones style document that you had to read, because trying to navigate that in some sort of legalese so it can fit in a bill, I imagine was quite a task. But maybe just add a little bit of that third-party verification. In fact, Brian, you and I were dealing with one of our clients in SoCal with this exact issue, right? They noticed some data sort of slipping out. They noticed some oddities, and in fact, it was a third party where they noticed some loss. So maybe just fill us in on that gotcha, just from your perspective, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's the third parties are typically where it's at. Again, your student records, anything you do to track their health, anything like that, those are all key things. And again, if I could emphasize one point, If you're expecting your internal staff to be cybersecurity experts, don't do that anymore. They can't. You can't. You outsource your legal counsel. You outsource your policing of your campuses, typically, to law enforcement. You've got to engage outside experts for your cybersecurity. You just can't do it anymore. If you're expecting your internal staff to do that, you're setting them up for failure, and you will be breached.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Brian. We appreciate you reading that 52-page document and translating it into simple terms for us who are not the experts like yourself. And I think the wisdom you shared about the evolution of technology and how this security piece really needs to be separated. You need to have your own focus on security. Every organization, 1 school, 100 schools, 1,000 schools. You need to have a special emphasis on security and a special plan, because it can absolutely stop things for you.
What's interesting to me is that so early in Governor Newsom's administration, he kind of had his eye on this ball. He knew that there was something about this that he needed to pay attention to. So you were like one of the early appointees to the administration in terms of the governor's task force on cybersecurity. When did that actually happen? When did you join that panel?
Actually, it was back in Brown's days.
Oh, it was?
Yeah, and I wasn't appointed. I raised my hand, and they said, "You." One of those things. So it's the cybersecurity task force. I'm actually chair of the risk management cyber subcommittee, and we are tasked with mitigating risk for schools and small businesses in California, because that's where the biggest exposure is. The organizations that typically have not had the resources to address cybersecurity concerns. And we put schools right at the top of the list as being short on those types of resources. So,
well, thanks for sharing that, Brian. And switching gears back again, Kevin, just the governor, there was some action on some bills last night. Can you talk to us about what happened and sort of, I guess, effectively what went away?
Sure. So it was the governor's last night he had for this year. The legislature had shut down already for the session, the 2-year session. They're going to start all over again next January. Technically they'll come back in December and elect officers, but that session is over, and the work they did, any bills that they passed on that last night of session were some of those last bills that the governor still had to act on. His last time to act would have been midnight last night, and he did take action on all the bills, vetoing or signing the different bills that crossed his desk. The two there are a number of bills that we were interested in, but the two in particular that I was actually very surprised about was the bill by Jose Medina. This is the bill that mandates the notion of ethnic studies in school districts. And then there was 1835, that was the Weber bill that addressed the issue of ending balances with regard to the supplemental and concentration grant money, would have kept it restricted. The governor vetoed both of these bills. And again, I didn't see any political downside for the governor to sign these bills. That's why I thought he would actually sign them. And he ended up vetoing both of those bills. The truth is that, for local control, I think the idea of, let local districts do what they want to do, that sort of thing, was probably more of the rationale, and then also not disturbing some of the things that have been done in the last administration on this. But really, the reason why I think the governor did it, as he said in his veto message on the Medina bill, why he vetoed that, is he basically wants to give CDE an opportunity to get it right relative to their ethnic studies curriculum, what that framework looks like. I think eventually he's going to come around to a mandate, but he wants to make sure it's free of some of the controversy that we saw in the last year on what was being done at the state level relative to putting together curriculum for that kind of a course. So there's that. I will tell you, Medina worked really hard on this bill. He got a lot of support for it. He had the teacher support, broad levels of support. He put a lot of amendments in that allowed local courses to actually qualify for being accepted as meeting the mandate. So there's no doubt, and he said it today, that he's going to go after this bill one more time. It had a lot of support in the legislature. This is the kind of bill that could actually be, veto override kind of legislation, although it would not be overridden since the session is over. But he's got a huge amount of legislators backing it, and that's why he's probably not hesitating to reintroduce the bill again next year. The other bill, the 1835 I mentioned about Weber, he vetoed it, but he essentially said, I'm going to enact it as part of the budget when he introduces his budget proposal next January 10th. So we're going to end up seeing that that money start to become more restricted after an initial year. So when there are ending balances as a result of what happens in 1 year, going to that second year, you've got money that's left over. You can expect that to be restricted as well for supplemental and concentration grant students. So we'll see what happens with both of those. But again, the governor will probably act on the budget implications of the Weber bill in his January budget.
Well, I guess it's kind of surprising to see the ethnic studies bill go away simply because, the state superintendent had really kind of like put it on his back, it felt like, and was championing the cause. It seemed like it had a lot of support and obviously a critical issue in today's world. So,
right.
And I want to say we even got some sort of, I don't know, political threats, if you will, from DC about it, so it's sad, I suppose, but hopefully, like you said, they're going to retool, come back, and we'll see something come back that will pass. So
yeah.
We'll keep our eyes on that. Thank you, Kevin. Also, we saw that the CDE is talking about learning logs. Can you talk about this? It's an issue we've been talking about since we had to go distance learning. What are we hearing about that today?
Yeah, and I've given occasional updates on this, that we knew that the pushback from the field, which has been pretty strong, about the template originally put out by CDE not really being reasonable. One of the things they appropriately point to, though, is that they're trying to bridge between legislative language that was passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, that's pretty specific, and what sort of, what level, what kind of latitude, if any at all, do we have to not be so prescriptive? And that's really what they're trying to bridge. And so the department came together, is working with different stakeholders on this issue, and they were going to actually take another shot at it and put out some guidance. And last week announced some, information on a very, very extensive, I think it was a 25-page guide that would give sort of some direction for LEAs on sort of following that old template. And it just wasn't enough for a lot of the folks that were a part of this exercise. So I think the department's actually going to try to start all over again and see if they can't come up with a revised template or a revised guidance that gives districts a little more flexibility within the parameters of the law. And there are LEAs that are doing a really good job with this, working with their SIS systems. San Diego County Office of Ed, for example, they believe that they've sort of solved this, but they do need the state, CDE in particular, to give its blessing to that approach. And I think if they take a look at what's happening in the field, some of the ideas that people are coming up with as alternatives, I think CDE will end up kind of following their lead. And so we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, it's hard to see how they're going to really be able to hold people's feet to the fire with all the challenges that we're facing now with connecting with folks. So, we'll follow the bouncing ball on this one, and hopefully we'll get enough clarity at some point in a reasonable fashion for people to actually comply. So, thanks for that, Kevin.
You betcha.
Yeah. So Brian, when we were prepping for this, you mentioned there was at least one ransomware attack a week in the Central Valley where you live. We're hearing about it. We've reported on this broadcast many times about large districts, Miami-Dade, student brings the network down. But we're hearing it again. Another top 10 district in the U.S. went down or actually had a breach, and it was very public this week that basically a ransomware attack. A lot of information from the district was stolen by hackers. They threatened the district. The district didn't comply, and now all that information is out in the dark web. Social security numbers, test scores, all sensitive information about employees and students. So, I guess, can you talk a little bit about, ransomware attacks? If it hasn't happened to a district yet, and you're a district leader watching this broadcast, what's top of mind for you when you're seeing this happen constantly? What do you think the first couple things that they could just be aware of, or maybe ask their team, that might help them just be more up to date, or help drive the district in a more safe direction in this regard?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. One of the biggest entry points for ransomware is staff clicking on ransom, emails that are infected, some type of a phishing email. And phishing emails are huge. If you don't have a phishing education program for your staff, you need to have that in place ASAP, because the average school district that has 200 employees, we've done statistical analysis, and 16 of those employees are clicking on ransomware emails daily. So you've got to be protected. You've got to educate your staff about what a ransomware email, what a phishing email is, and how to detect them, and how to respond to them and not click on them. That's the biggest thing districts can do right now, is have a phishing education campaign going and educating your staff, because you've got the door open and people are clicking on those emails as we speak. You've got to prepare them and educate them on how to identify it.
Thanks, Brian. I guess the other thing that occurs to me is, an ounce of prevention, right? Most breaches, the hackers have been in your network for quite a while before there's something actually taken and there's action taken, because they want to sort of maximize their opportunity. And I think you nail on the head with a phishing campaign, because that's a human behavior issue you can change without a big firewall or piece of software. But I would also say, maybe just if you can talk a little bit about the alternative, which is, the ounce of prevention. What's something else that's sort of proactive on the, let's say maybe a deep dive, cybersecurity sort of deep dive, that people might be able to look under the hood and see if they're at risk?
Yeah, there's a number of things you can do, and it's basically called a risk assessment. You need to see what's at risk in your environment. And that's everything from looking at your external vulnerabilities through a pen test, through looking at monitoring your network internally to see if something bad is running around. And you're right, Tim. Typically, bad malicious code runs around on the network for months, sometimes years before it's detected. And if you can find ransomware before it activates and encrypts your files, you're better off. And a lot of times, insurance companies, your cyber insurance will cover the eradication of that ransomware before it's activated. So you can get in there, get an insurance company to pay for it, and get it eradicated before it does damage. So again, you need to engage your outside experts to monitor that network.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I'll just say, you called out one thing: phishing tests. So you're going to get a score. You said there's 16 out of 100 that are clicking every day. Yep. You need to know what your phishing score is. And you said pen test, that's a penetration test. You basically hire somebody to come in and poke holes. You're going to get a score effectively of how vulnerable you are. So as a leader today, if you're operating a network of any size, these are two pieces of information you need. You didn't necessarily need it 5 years ago. You need it today. Yes. Otherwise, the largest, most capable school districts in the U.S. are struggling. You're obviously going to have similar challenges. And I'll just say, we talked about notable outages last week. We'll talk about it every week. Microsoft Outlook went down for 6 hours this week, and they're not exactly saying why, if it was something malicious or just an error. But I mean, you're going to go down, you're going to have issues. And again, I don't want to harp on it too much. You have to be ready for these types of events. Yep. So with that, I want to just say, thank you so much, Brian, and thank you, Kevin. Real quick, actually, I almost forgot. We have a session coming up at Fall Q. Fall Q is generous enough to have us do a special edition on the November ballot of politics and tech. So if you haven't signed up for Fall Q yet, please reach out to your teams, your teachers, your fellow administrators. Sign up for Fall Q. It's going to be a virtual event. You'll get to see a special edition panel where Kevin and I, Pam's actually going to lead it. Pam Hernandez, Executive Director of Q. She's going to lead that. We're going to be there with some superintendents to have some real context of how these bills may impact them, large and small districts. So take a moment, go ahead and register for Fall Q. We'll put the link in the description and in the email that you send out, Kevin. And with that, I want to say thanks again. Make sure you subscribe to our broadcast. I'll put it on this finger this time. And please share and retweet us on social media. We do appreciate it. So thanks, everybody. And thanks, Kevin and Brian. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.